While the FIFA World Cup is definitely a very exciting time for fans, we can't help but feel like the overall experience has been soured a bit by all the many controversies that have been going on with the 2022 Qatar FIFA World Cup. If you're not sure just what's going on, you've arrived at the right video. Today we're going to discuss all of the controversies and a lot more. Let's dive right in. First off, Qatar has been accused of corruption and bribery. Fans were quite surprised to hear FIFA's announcement in 2010 that the 2022 tournament would be held in Qatar. There were concerns about how a small desert monarchy qualified for the World Cup when other countries who have established themselves as powerhouses in the sporting world, like the United States, Japan, and Australia, didn't. Even before the announcement, there were doubts being cast on the bidding process, and 2 members of its 24-person executive committee had even been suspended after allegations surfaced that they were offering to sell their votes. That was just the beginning though. In 2014, UK-based Sunday Times reported on a bunch of leaked emails and documents that seemed to suggest that a Qatari soccer official had paid bribes to FIFA officials, and these apparently went into the millions. Then, in 2015, the US Department of Justice unsealed indictments that went against 9 FIFA officials. They were accused of racketeering, money laundering, and even wire fraud. All of these activities seem to have been connected with a convoluted scheme to sell the broadcasting rights for the tournament. The fact that Sepp Blatter, FIFA's longtime president, stepped down during all this didn't exactly evoke a lot of confidence either. Plus, in April 2020, the Justice Department released evidence that suggested that 3 FIFA officials had taken bribes from some people, causing them to vote for Qatar. While this inquiry proved to be somewhat conclusive, there's evidence of a bunch of wrongdoing happening within FIFA. Whether the decision was corrupt, it does allow FIFA to expand to a new region while expanding its market share. Next, the tournament's infrastructure has been built by low-paid migrant workers. Even for a country like Qatar, which has no shortage of resources, hosting the World Cup is nothing short of a massive undertaking. It requires billions of dollars worth of investments in the development of new stadiums, transportation, and accommodations. Hundreds of thousands of fans attend the event, so it's not possible for every country to imagine being able to achieve something even close to this. Qatar has reportedly spent nearly $220 billion on the development of its infrastructure for the tournament, and they've managed to keep their labor costs low by relying on migrant workers who are paid ridiculously low wages. The rates they're given border on exploitation, and this isn't even a secret. The difficult work conditions of these workers have been a long-existing problem in the country, even before the decision to hold the World Cup. Until the late 2010s, migrant laborers made up about 94% of the country's workforce, with a total population of around 2 million. Workers are bound to their sponsors in the country through the kafala system. This makes it so they have to agree to some legally binding contracts, which, as you can imagine, are often quite exploitative and unfair. That said, Qatar has brought about some reforms to its kafala system recently, but some parts of it still remain, which allows employers to have an absurd amount of control over the lives of their workers. Around 6,500 workers from countries like Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka have reportedly died in Qatar since 2010. Plus, Qatar is also under fire for sportswashing its human rights abuses. Sportswashing is a term that's used to describe the acts of repressive governments using popular sporting events as a way of improving their reputation internationally. The main goal is to change the public perception while shining light away from the human rights issues they may be carrying out. Qatar has been criticized for doing exactly this. Many even consider the 2022 FIFA World Cup as a textbook example of what sportswashing is like. The country has been criticized by international human rights groups for laws that limit the freedoms of LGBTQ people and women. As per the laws in Qatar, it's illegal for people of the same to have intercourse. It's rare for these laws to actually get applied, but LGBTQ folk in Qatar have continued to report harassment and intimidation from authorities. While the World Cup organizers stated that LGBTQ fans will be welcomed and that they'll feel safe during the tournament, activists have stated that they legitimately fear for the safety of LGBTQ audiences. The country has also had issues with freedom of expression. As per Qatar's penal code, speech that criticizes the emir or spreads false news is criminalized. The country has been weaponizing these restrictions as a way to silence any critics that might be raising actual concerns. As recently as 2021, the Qatari government charged 7 citizens who had criticized the country's newly restrictive voting laws with using social media to spread false news. The regime has also had a target out for journalists, especially those covering the conditions of migrant laborers. Not to mention, FIFA is massaging the numbers on its sustainability pledge. FIFA has made the promise that this year's tournament will be the first carbon-neutral World Cup ever. Researchers who have taken a closer look behind it all seem to think otherwise though. A lot of creative accounting has gone into making the tournament look as carbon neutral as FIFA claims it is. This year's tournament will be played at around 8 venues. 6 of these are newly built stadiums, with one that existed before. The final venue is said to be temporary and will be deconstructed and repurposed after the World Cup concludes. The tournament's organizers calculated the total emissions that were released in the construction of the stadiums, and then divided that figure by the average lifespan of each stadium. This is said to be around 60 years for most of them. The World Cup only lasts for a month, and so the organizers stated that in the end, the tournament is only responsible for 1 month's worth of emissions, which will be spread across the entirety of those 60 years. But even that amount is just a small fraction of the much larger carbon emission that resulted from the stadium's construction. Experts believe that the tournament's emissions have been underestimated by as much as 1.4 million tons, and even that's a pretty conservative estimate. This would bring the total carbon footprint to be around a whopping 5 million tons, instead of the reported 3.6 million tons that the FIFA organizers had announced. We should also state that this isn't the first time the World Cup is facing controversies. During the 2018 tournament in Russia, people raised questions about FIFA's relationship with authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin. Back in 2014, when the World Cup took place in Brazil, there was an international outcry over how tens of thousands of poor and working-class Brazilians had been forcefully removed to make room for a new tournament, even going as far back as 1934, when the second World Cup took place in Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy. Soccer fans had to deal with their enthusiasm for the game being somewhat affected by political compromises. But as we've seen time and time again, despite the controversies, the tournament continues to pull in bowers from all over the globe. The World Cup in 2018 was reportedly viewed by 3.5 billion people. It has a global appeal that is outright undeniable. It seems not even human rights violations and corruption can reduce that. Finally, is the World Cup likely to undergo any changes because of these controversies? To put it simply, no, not really. While yes, some efforts had been made by FIFA to root out problems like corruption and improve transparency and accountability, it's still unclear if any of these reforms have led to legitimate betterment. Most people seem to think that these reforms sound like decent ideas, but in practice, they've so far failed to leave behind any notable changes. The organization in general seems to suffer from a lack of transparency and accountability. That said, players and fans have shown a willingness to be more open about these issues and are actively taking part in discussions about them. In September, a group of soccer federations from Europe announced a plan to have members of their teams wear rainbow-colored armbands during the games as a way of standing against Qatar's treatment of its LGBTQ citizens. Denmark's national team also showcased a toned-down version of its kits, which was done as a way of speaking out against the mistreatment of Qatar's migrant laborers. Cities in France have also announced that they won't set up fan zones where people can watch the tournament in public, despite having done so in the past. But even with these efforts, the tournament's massive size and seemingly endless popularity likely mean that FIFA won't need to undergo any major overhauls, at least not anytime soon. No matter how much people may protest, every 4 years it's like the slate has been wiped clean anyway. That's a wrap for this video. What do you think about all the controversies surrounding the 2022 Qatar FIFA World Cup? Comment below, give the video a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see ya in the next one.